All praises to Ahaya, Warawak Kadash, Bahashim Yeshaya. That's all praises to the Father and the Holy Spirit, in the name of the Son. Shalom, family. This is little son Sabal, Nabaya. Once again we have come to another Thankskilling. I'm not going to go into all of the details about Thankskilling that I went into a year ago. If you want to see a Thankskilling breakdown, just click the link in the description to the video I did last year. Also, I think I'm going to go ahead and put it on my community tab. I'll do that right now. What I am going to go into today is a little bit of history so that you all will remember that this is a day of mourning. Mourning the genocide of our people. And it can't be quantified into one event. I'm just going to bring out a few facts. Jumping right into it, I'm going to read out of a book called America's Hidden History by Kenneth C. Davis. Let us begin on the second paragraph on page 75. In Mayflower, an account of King Philip's War, Nathaniel Philbrick appropriately summarizes the devastation. The English had suffered casualties that are difficult for us to comprehend today. During the 14 months of King Philip's War, Plymouth Colony lost close to 8% of its men, but the English losses seem inconsequential when compared with those of the Indians. Of a total native population of approximately 20,000, at least 2,000 had been killed in battle or died of their injuries. 3,000 had died of sickness and starvation. 1,000 had been slipped out of the country as slaves, while an estimated 2,000 eventually fled to either the Iroquois or the West Salakia. It says, an estimated 2,000 eventually fled to either the Iroquois to the west or the Abenakis to the north. Overall, the Native American population of southern New England has sustained a loss of somewhere between 60 and 80%. Survivors on both sides were left widowed, orphaned, homeless, impoverished, and in the case of the natives, often in slavery. Many Indian children were sold as indentured servants to Puritan families, and others, apparently including Metacom's son, were shipped to the West Indies slave markets. The war nearly wiped out the last remnants of the Wampanoag, the confederation of tribes whose assistance had helped keep the first pilgrims alive back in the winter and spring of 1621, and who then sat down to enjoy the first harvest feast of legend in October 1621. Other tribes allied with Philip's Wampanoag, such as the Nipmuc and Narragansett, also suffered devastating losses. Their crushing defeat signaled the end, as Neil Salisbury wrote, of the legal and political autonomy of the region's Native Americans. The war also led to the introduction of a royal governor in New England, greatly diminishing the New England colonies' near autonomy with far-reaching consequences. So the same people who sat down and feasted with these aboriginals, let's call them what they are, the same people who sat down and feasted with these aboriginals came back later and aided to the destruction of 60 to 80% of their population. Why don't they talk about this at Thanksgiving. Notice also that this book actually supports what we brought out in the past, talking about how a lot of the slave trading was actually done between the Americas. It was actually a lot more done in the Americas compared to the very little that was done from the west coast of Africa. The author tells you that they were taken as slaves into the Caribbean. Speaking of the Caribbean, let me read a little bit to you from a short account of the destruction of the Indies, written by Bartolomé de las Casas in 1542. Wasn't published until 1552. Okay. Let's read a little bit from the introduction. Into and among these gentle sheep, endowed by their Maker and Creator with all the qualities aforesaid, did creep the Spaniards, who no sooner had knowledge of these people than they became like fierce wolves and tigers and lions, who have gone many days without food or nourishment. And no other thing have they done for 40 years until this day, and still today see fit to do, but dismember, slay, perturb, afflict, torment, and destroy the Indians by all manner of cruelty, new and diverse and most singular manners, such as never before seen or read or heard of, some few of which shall be recounted below. And they do this to such a degree that on the island of Hispaniola, of the above 3,000,000 souls that we once saw, today there will be no more than 200 of those native people remaining. The island of Cuba is almost as long as from Valladolid to Rome. Today it is almost devoid of population. The island of San Juan, Puerto Rico, and that of Jamaica, large and well-favored and lovely islands both, have been laid waste. On the Isles of the Lucayos, Bahamas, where there were once above 500,000 souls, today there is not a living creature. All were killed while being brought, and because of being brought, to the island of Hispaniola, where the Spaniards saw that their stock of natives of the latter island had come to an end. Two principal and general customs have been employed by those calling themselves Christians, who have passed this way, in extirpating and striking from the face of the earth those suffering nations, the first being unjust, cruel, bloody, and tyrannical warfare, the other after having slain all those who might yearn toward or suspire after or think of freedom or consider escaping from the torments that they are made to suffer, by which I mean all the native-born lords and adult males, for it is the Spaniards' custom in their wars to allow only young boys and females to live, being to oppress them with the hardest, harshest, and most heinous bondage to which men or beasts might ever be bound into. The cause for which the Christians have slain and destroyed so many and such infinite numbers of souls has been simply to get as their ultimate end the Indians' gold of them, and to stuff themselves with riches in very few days, and to raise themselves to high estates, without proportion to their birth or breeding, it should be noted, owing to the insatiable greed and ambition that they have had, which has been greater than any the world has seen before. Salakia, which has been greater than any the world has ever seen before. All the Indians of the Indies never once did aught hurt or wrong to Christians, but rather held them to be descended from heaven, from the sky, until many times that their neighbors received from Christians many acts of wrongful harm, theft, murder, violence, and vexation. So, Bartolomé de las Casas was a Dominican friar. He wrote this as an expose to try and get some level of help from the other side of the world. Because as I just read, he tells you that they were still committing these heinous acts. They were still in 1542 doing these things. So if Columbus came in 1491 or 1492, then that's half a decade minimum. See, the slaughter did not start. The treachery, the deception did not begin in the 1600s with the arrival of the Mayflower. I believe it came, 1620? The entire Thankskilling story is just an insult to our people, to the Aboriginals, to the Americans. The sad thing is we are a people who mentally have been so destroyed that we begin to give praise and honor to our destroyers, to those who came amongst us and raped and pillaged and brought things that would keep us in perpetual sin. And then we hold on to those things as if they are good things, as if they are positive things. Let me read you guys something else. This time we're going to go to a book called 1491, written by Charles C. Mann. Actually, before I start reading this, I don't know how many of you know this. A lot of you do know it, I'm sure. But I'm born and raised in Louisiana, in Caddo Parish. Well, let me tell you something. If you leave Caddo Parish and head south, then what you come to is DeSoto Parish. They named an entire parish in Louisiana to Hernando de Soto. Let's read about him in 1491. We're going to start reading on page 110. On May 30th, 1539, Hernando de Soto landed his private army near Tampa Bay in Florida. De Soto was a novel figure, half warrior, half venture capitalist. He grew very rich, very young in Spanish America by becoming a market leader in the nascent slave trade. The profits helped to fund the conquest of the Inca, which made De Soto wealthier still. He accompanied Pizarro to Tawantinsuyu, I can't pronounce that, burnishing his reputation for brutality. He personally tortured Chalcochima, Atahualpa's chief general, before his execution, literally looking for new worlds to conquer. De Soto returned to Spain soon after his exploits in Peru. In Charles V's court, he persuaded the bored monarch to let him loose in North America with an expedition of his own. He sailed to Florida with 600 soldiers, 200 horses, and 300 pigs. From today's perspective, it is difficult to imagine the ethical system that could justify De Soto's subsequent actions. For 4 years, his force wandered through what are now Florida, Georgia, North and South Carolina, Tennessee, Alabama, Mississippi, Arkansas, Texas, and Louisiana, looking for gold and wrecking most everything it touched. The inhabitants often fought back vigorously, but they were baffled by the Spaniards' motives and astounded by the sight and sounds of horses and guns. De Soto died of fever with his expedition in ruins. Along the way, he managed to rape, torture, enslave, and kill countless Indians. But the worst thing he did, some researchers say, was entirely without malice. The devil is a lie. I'm sure he did it on purpose. He brought pigs. According to Charles Hudson, an anthropologist at the University of Georgia who spent 15 years reconstructing DeSoto's path. The expedition built barges and crossed the Mississippi a few miles downstream from the present site of Memphis. It was a nervous time. Every afternoon, one of his force later recalled, several thousand Indian soldiers approached in canoes to within a stone's throw of the Spanish and mocked them as they labored. The Indians, painted with ochre, wore plumes of many colors, having feathered shields in their hands, with which they sheltered the oarsmen on either side, the warriors standing erect from bow to stern, holding bows and arrows. Utterly without fear, DeSoto ignored the taunts and occasional volleys of arrows and poled over the river into what is now eastern Arkansas, a land thickly set with great towns. According to the soldiers' account, 2 or 3 of them to be seen from one. Each city protected itself with earthen walls, sizable moats, and dead-eye archers. In his brazen fashion, DeSoto marched right in, demanded food, and marched out. After DeSoto left, no Europeans visited this part of the Mississippi Valley for more than a century. Early in 1682, foreigners appeared again, this time Frenchmen in canoes. In one seat was René Robert Cavelier, Sieur de La Salle. La Salle passed through the area where DeSoto had found cities cheek by jowl. It was deserted. The French didn't see an Indian village for 200 miles. After 50 settlements existed in this strip of the Mississippi when DeSoto showed up, according to Anne Ramanowski, an archaeologist at the University of New Mexico. By La Salle's time, the number had shrunk to perhaps 10. Wow, y'all see that? So DeSoto came and wrought such destruction that it turned from 50 settlements to 10. Let's keep reading. Had shrunk to perhaps 10. Some probably inhabited by recent immigrants. DeSoto had a privileged glimpse of an Indian world, Hudson told me. The window opened and slammed shut. When the French came in and record opened up again, it was a transformed reality. A civilization crumbled. The question is, how did this happen? Today, most historians and anthropologists believe the culprit was disease. In the view of Ramanowski and Patricia Galloway, an anthropologist of the University of Texas, the source of contagion was very likely not DeSoto's army, but his ambulatory meat locker, his 300 pigs. DeSoto's company was too small to be an effective biological weapon. Sicknesses like measles and smallpox would have burned through the 600 men long before they reached the Mississippi. But that would not have been true for his pigs. Pigs were an essential to the conquistadors as horses. Pigs were as essential to the conquistadors as horses. Spanish armies, in a porcine cloud, drawn by the supper trowel, the lean, hungry animals circled the troops like darting dogs. Neither species regarded the arrangement as novel. They have lived together in Europe for millennia. When humans and domesticated animals share quarters, they are constantly exposed to each other's microbes. Over time, mutation lets animal diseases jump to people. Avian influenza becomes human influenza. Bovine rinderpest becomes human measles. Horsepox becomes human smallpox. Unlike Europeans, Indians did not live in constant contact with many animals. They domesticated only the dog, the turkey, and the llama, the alpaca, the Muscovy duck, and the guinea pig in the Andes. In some ways, this is not surprising. The New World had fewer animal candidates for taming than the Old. Moreover, few Indians carry the gene that permits adults to digest lactose, a form of sugar abundant in milk. And look at me, lactose intolerant right now. Let's keep reading. Non-milk drinkers, one imagines, would be less likely to work at domesticating milk-giving animals. But this is guesswork. The fact is that what scientists call zoonotic disease was little known in the Americas. By contrast, swine, mainstays of European agriculture, transmit anthrax, brucellosis, leptospirosis, trichinosis, and tuberculosis. Pigs breed exuberantly and can pass diseases to deer and turkeys, which can infect people. I wonder how many people eating turkeys today that have been contaminated by pigs. Let's keep reading. Only a few of De Soto's pigs would have had to wander off to contaminate the forest. The calamity wreaked by the De Soto expedition, Ramafanowski and Galloway argued, extend across the whole southeast. The societies of the Caddo, didn't I tell y'all I was from Caddo Parish? The societies of the Caddo on the Texas-Arkansas border and the Coosa in western Georgia both disintegrated soon after. The Caddo had a taste for monumental architecture, public plazas, ceremonial platforms, mausoleums. After De Soto's army left, the Caddo stopped erecting community centers and began digging community cemeteries. Between the visits of De Soto and LaSalle, according to Timothy K. Pertua, an archaeological consultant in Austin, Texas, the Caddoan population fell from about 200,000 to about 8,500, a drop of nearly 96%. My goodness. If that don't bring tears to your eyes, my goodness. Let's keep reading. In the 18th century, the tally shrank further to 1,400. An equivalent loss today would reduce the population of New York City to 56,000, not enough to fill Yankee Stadium. That's one reason whites think of Indians as nomadic hunters. Russell Thornton, an anthropologist at the University of California at Los Angeles, said to me, "Everything else, all the heavily populated urbanized societies, was wiped out." Could a few pigs truly wreak this much destruction? Such apocalyptic scenarios have invited skepticism since Henry Dobbins first drew them to wide attention. After all, no eyewitness accounts exist of the devastation. None of the peoples in the Southeast had any form of writing known today. Spanish and French narratives cannot be taken at face value, and in any case say nothing substantial about disease. The belief that epidemics swept through the Southeast comes less from European accounts on the region than from the disparities among those accounts. Although the archaeological record is suggestive, it is also frustratingly incomplete. Soon after the Spaniards visited, mass graves became more common in the Southeast, but there is yet no solid proof that a single Indian in them died of a pig-transmitted disease. Asserting that De Soto's visit caused the subsequent collapse of the Caddo and Coosa may be only the old logical fallacy of post hoc ergo propter hoc. Let me say something on this. This is like Elder Agil talks about. This is snake talk, where they say one thing, then they come back trying to confuse you. The writing is on the wall. We know how they brought diseases over here and just wiped out countless legions of our people. Do not be dissuaded by the snake talk. They did come over here. They did bring those filthy swine that the Bible tells us not to even touch the dead carcass of. But they brought them over here. They just told you how the swine can actually infect other animals that we eat, clean animals. You see that? You see how that works? The record, the history is clear. De Soto came with his pigs. He left, and he left the population decimated from 200,000 to 8,500. My goodness. And this is who we name the parish after. If you're not from Louisiana, then you probably don't know that Louisiana has parishes instead of counties. So just like, you might live in Arizona and you might live in Maricopa County, but in Louisiana you would live in Caddo Parish or LaSalle Parish. And yes, they also named a parish after LaSalle, who came after De Soto, who we just read about. You see that? You see how they put up their destroyers in points of reverence? It's crazy. Now let's go back to the first book we went into, America's Hidden History by Kenneth C. Davis. We're going to go to page 27, and we're going to read a little bit more about Hernando de Soto. It says, before leaving Spain, De Soto briefly met with Cabeza de Vaca, but if De Soto had gleaned anything useful from Cabeza de Vaca, he did not put the intelligence to good use. Well schooled in the conquistador's most brutal techniques, De Soto employed them in scorched earth march through Florida and other parts of the American Southeast. Starting in 1539, De Soto's disastrous campaign replayed all of Narvaez's worst mistakes, tragically for both his men and the Indians they encountered. Utterly blinded by the hope of uncovering another Aztec or Incan empire, De Soto led a forced march that was little more than a reign of terror. These were the things they brought: crossbows, the harquebus, horses, not seen in the Americas before Cortez, and many war dogs. You guys remember when Big Judah went into the, what's it called? The Dogs of Conquest. You can also read about this in American Holocaust. Anyway, let's keep reading. Let's see. And many war dogs. Long used in Europe, these fearsome armored mastiffs and wolfhounds were trained to attack and rip humans to pieces. The Spanish employed them with horrible effect against people who had never seen horses or guns, had no steel, and fought their highly ritualized battles with obsidian knives, wearing cotton armor. Dogs were as standard as horses in the Spanish invasion, as Paul Schneider described their grim value. Cortez took them to Mexico. Ponce de Leon took them to Puerto Rico. In Panama, Balboa used dogs not just in battle, but to enforce good Christian sexual mores and dress codes. The native king's brother and a number of other countries were dressed as women, and according to the accounts of the neighbors, shared the same passion. Vasco ordered 40 of them to be torn to pieces by dogs. Now De Soto put them to deadly use in Florida, setting them on Indian villagers to break any resistance, but in vain, with his army wandering aimlessly, bested by tribes who had learned from their earlier encounters with the Spanish. De Soto's campaign ended in misery. Sickened by disease, he died on the banks of the Mississippi on May 21st, 1542. The remnants of his army limped back to Mexico a year later. Now, in the same book, I want you to go to page, if you have the book, if not, just listen. I want you to go to page 4. Nope. Salakia, my mistake. Page 5. Go to page 5. And it says there, the pigs De Soto brought from Cuba may have been descendants of the pigs Queen Isabella enjoined Columbus to take with him on his second voyage. Wow. So I know that's not anything concrete, but it shows you how the conquest of the Americas was almost like an orchestrated symphony of destruction. And really it goes back to one of the first videos I did, where we went into the book of Enoch and we talked about how, this is all prophecy. This is all prophecy that would befall our people because of their sins. Talks about how the Most High would use the enemy to come and bring destruction. And, we talked about in other videos how when Pizarro and his men were fighting against the, I believe it was the Incas, I might be mistaken. But we talked about how they said that the natives were falling so easily. It was like one conquistador to tens of natives. And they even talked about how they looked up in the sky and they saw the angels. They saw Michael and his angels cheering them on. And you might say, well, why would Angel and his Michaels cheer them on? But that's actually scripture. It tells you that this would happen, and it's in the book of Enoch. And I'm not going to go into it right now, but if you want to go back and look at that video, I believe it was called mini books. Yes, mini books. Go back, find that video about the mini books, and I believe it's in there. Actually, you know what? I don't think it's that one. I think it's the one called Prophecy Apocalypse 70 Shepherds. Read that one. Read about the 70 shepherds. And or watch that video and read along. Many precepts. And the same thing with what we're bringing out today. If you want scriptures for all of these things, I've already covered the scriptures in the last Thankskilling video I did a year ago. Like I said, I'm going to put it in the description of this video so you guys can click the link if you haven't watched that already. The whole purpose of this was I just wanted to shed some light. I wanted to shed some light on the fact that this day should be a day of mourning. But instead, they have totally hijacked. They've totally hijacked what this day should be about and made it be about exaltation. Exaltation, really, of conquest. It's not Thanksgiving at all. It's Thankskilling. It's genocide. I hope you guys got some edification today. And I hope that this video reaches someone who is able to see the atrocities of the past and the way that they're being exalted through these wicked holidays. All praises to Ahaya, Warawak Kadash, Bahashem Yeshaya. Shalom.